to my castle in Transylvania. Remember the old line in the horror movies years and years ago? Bela Lugosi as Dracula, Boris Karloff as the Frankenstein monster, the movies that chilled us all as we sat frightened in darkened theaters on Saturday afternoon. Tonight, late night television brings back the good old days and the better new days of monsters and movies as we discuss the four biggest monsters of all time. Dracula, the Frankenstein monster, the Wolfman, and King Kong, and a few other surprises. And I hope you'll stay with us. Parenthetically, before we get into monsters and what made them great and what makes them scary, it was 10 years ago tonight that the great blackout occurred in New York City. New Yorkers, what are you doing differently tonight from what you did 10 years ago? Hope you'll stay tuned for Monsters and Movies as tomorrow continues right after these announcements. Wait a second. And now to the three gentlemen who will tell us about all those bad monsters in movies. First of all, Mr. Leonard Wolf, who is quite probably the only professor in America who offers a college-level course entitled simply Monsters, as well as other classes specifically designed to study the legendary Dracula. Mr. Wolf teaches at San Francisco State University. He has recently authored a book entitled The Annotated Dracula, and possibly not by coincidence alone, was born in Vulcan, Romania, which is commonly known as Transylvania. Mr. Wolf, welcome, sir. Mr. Peter Cushing,
hello,
who is sitting on a cushion. In New York City over the coming weekend, they are going to have the famous Monsters Convention. The cult following of monster and horror films is growing higher and higher, and one of the most famous stars, and I'm told the king of the current horror film craze, is Peter Cushing, who has starred in over 6 Frankenstein films. He has done such fantastic pictures as The Horror Express, The Creeping Flesh, and Tales from the Crypt. Forrest Ackerman, here is a gentleman who has written for almost every famous magazine that has to do with monsters, including Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, one of the magazines that's sponsoring the Famous Monsters Convention. He has edited several books, including Boris Karloff, The Frankenstein Monster, and he wears a cape tonight, which I am told was worn by Bela Lugosi in the Dracula pictures of some years ago. Huh?
Very true.
Do you guys ever get scared like we used to in the theaters? I'm going to ask you this first, Mr. Cushing, because you look scary.
Do I look
scary? Yes, you do. You look menacing, surely.
Do you mean, do I get scared of what I do?
Mm-hmm. When you
As an actor, I'm always frightened of anything I do because I never feel I do it well enough. But I don't get frightened of the characters. That would be no good at all.
What about when you sit down and watch a Frankenstein picture that you just completed? Aren't you a little bit frightened?
No. It's usually about 6 months after one's made the picture, you see some sort of cut of the picture, and usually I like to see the final cut because then you really see what the audience are going to see. And after those 6 months, a lot of the raw edges have worn off of feeling that I hadn't done the scenes well enough, or I could be better in such and such. And you can see it impersonal in a way. But I'm not scared because when you've been so close to a script, and you have to really study a script to know what it's all about, that you're beyond being scared. But if it's a picture I haven't been in, then I can be scared indeed, but not my own.
Would you fellas agree that if we were casting a man to be in a shocker picture, that his face is absolutely perfect? Look at those eyes, how they glisten, the high cheekbones.
I'm better when I got my hairpiece on.
He very frequently, plays straight roles.
Thank you,
and
dear
it's very
boy.
important to notice that he's the man who discovers that the quality of the horror is in us. His straight role, he's not the monster, he's not the horror creature. He plays the priest, the knower, the man who teaches us the meaning of it all.
And the Saker of Hearts.
Yes. Now you're talking about one of my favorite monster is Dracula. I used to sit through those things 3 and 4 times, and when they are on the late night television now after we're off the air, I still watch them. Tell me about Dracula. Was there ever a real Dracula?
Well, recently there's come into prominence the name of Vlad Tepes, who was called Dracula, the son of Dracul, a 15th century petty tyrant of Transylvania, about whom the most significant thing one ought to say is that he was not a vampire. He was a very, very bad fellow. On the other hand, Bram Stoker took his reputation for wickedness and created a figure in Stoker's novel, Dracula, which is the basis for my book, The Annotated Dracula. The character Dracula in that book is the one that I think has captured the imagination, probably of England and America first, and then France and Italy and Germany.
Didn't Christopher Lee do a film playing Vlad, with the...
Yes.
For television.
Yes, it was
the
Dracula
Swedish company did it.
It was finally, yes, it came out about 1970, and he did it in connection with Floresco and McNally, as a matter of fact.
Oh, yes. But it was about the actual man, wasn't it? Yes, upon, I suppose, whom Bram Stoker based his stories.
Yes, he did.
Was he impaled? He was called Vlad the Impaler.
Vlad impaled his victims, some 30 or 40,000 of them, on very
had his
long
meal underneath.
Yes. Yes,
cheap gravy.
Were there ever... Notice how I waited for it. I knew it was coming. Yeah, oh, yeah.
Careful around here, We're all comics at heart.
Were there ever vampires, people that would suck the blood from other people?
There certainly were, and if I may say so, there certainly are.
You're kidding.
Yes. In one of my books, there's a transcription of an interview I made with a living vampire. It's not so unusual. You may recall that the last vampire executed for his crimes was in not 1648, but 1948 in London. His name is John Hay. And
frightening.
Very frightening story. It's an illness, like many other psychopathic illnesses, where people imagine that they need human blood to survive, or where, as with the young man I interviewed, there's a psychosexual distress in him that requires that he take human blood to achieve his delight. There's another figure, probably the wickedest man that I know anything at all about, who was the Marshal of France and who rode with Joan of Arc in the years when she was achieving her greatest spiritual power, who then retired after she was executed. He retired to his estate and then spent many, many years of his life committing one abomination after another. I can't really go into the details. They're too dreadful.
Why not?
You must give us the details. Please, I really, could you give us just several abominations?
Well,
you've got three sitting here.
I tell you something. It's an abomination that will turn us from comedy to a certain amount of grim consideration of human frailty and monstrosity. He murdered children and murdered them.
That's enough abomination. Yeah, I understand.
I thought you'd stop me somewhere.
All right. No, I thought you were speaking in jest.
His name is Gilles. No, I was not speaking in jest. His name is Gilles de Rais.
Yes.
Easily the worst.
He was mentioned in that film. Forgotten the title.
I'm glad to see you do that.
Yes, forgotten the title. I was a collector of books, and the man who used to get books for me he bought one from that very man.
Skull, or the man who collected Poe.
That's right. Yes, that's right. That was the one.
You knew Karloff.
Yes.
How did he feel about the Frankenstein pictures?
Well, I happened to be in his flat in London at the time that he was going to see the film for the first time after 25 years, and he was taking his wife to see it also. And he said to me that he was very pleased with the response that he had received from all over the world, as far away as from Australia. Particularly the young people of the world understood that he was a misunderstood creature. And James Whale, who had directed him in that, did a scene which never reached the screen, and Karloff felt was rightly so. You probably remember Little Maria, the flower that didn't float. There was this scene between them where she was offering him a petal, and that pleased him, that when he threw his flower in, finally he was all out of flowers, and he thought, well, flowers float, little girls must float. So he threw her into the water with the best intentions in the world, was quite surprised that she drowned. But he felt that gave a kind of a viciousness to the to the creature that he preferred
Doesn't
not
this
to
tie
be
in
seen.
with the abomination that you just mentioned, though? Because that would have been the murder of a child on the screen. There was
in the book, of course, it's he's a very sad character, the monster, isn't he?
He's a sad character in the film, too.
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
Well,
I used to feel sorry. Didn't the monster cry in one picture? Don't I remember seeing
yes,
a tear?
We Belong Dead in The Bride, when he had Elsa Lanchester had been fashioned for him, and she reacted in such horror from him that broke the monster's heart, and a tear crept into his eye. And
marvelous.
It's interesting to compare the difference in our feelings when we watch the Frankenstein creature and then see a film that I saw just recently here. I think it's called The Brain of Jonathan Soames, in which the person, he's not a creature, he's just an ordinary person who was born asleep and stayed asleep for 30 years, and then some surgeon wakes him up, and then we see him. He repeats the Frankenstein story, but we don't have a sense of acute pity for him. And it's the ugliness of the creature that emphasizes his innocence. And I think that innocence...
Sort of, the first time one felt that very strongly was The Hunchback of Notre Dame, wasn't it? The Charles Lawton one. And he got enormous sympathy for that, to Quasimodo.
Almost all of these monsters that we're going to be talking about have a special competence to raise in us the double feeling, first of fear and then of pity, which means that they come very close to Aristotle's definition of tragedy. And that's a curious...
All right, can we go down the monsters one by one and talk about their characteristics and what made them appealing and what made them believable? Because I suspect the secret of most good horror films is engendering in the audience the feeling it really could have happened.
Oh, yes.
But I have to stop for just a couple of minutes. We will continue after these announcements, and hang on to your seats. We'll be right back. But these three gentlemen have with them some artifacts and memorabilia and props, and we'll be going through that down the road. But I do want to talk about the big four. Did I identify them correctly? The Wolfman, Dracula, the Frankenstein monster, and King Kong.
King Kong, yes.
King Kong. The werewolf would be the Wolfman. Let's start with the werewolf, the Wolfman.
Well, which of us wants to start with a werewolf?
Actually, I would add a fifth. I would go back into the silent days of Lon Chaney Sr., the man of a thousand faces, and the most famous face of all. I think the last time I was really frightened was when I saw Mary Philbin take the mask off the Phantom of the Opera.
Oh, yes, that's a great moment.
I think that the four, however, represent America's... If America has a demonology, those four are the chief demons in its demonology.
Let's throw the Phantom in, too, later on, because he, too, engendered a lot of sympathy. But let's start with the werewolf.
Well, the Wolfman seems to be... again, there's a quality of innocence that he is compelled to his changes. He doesn't choose to turn into a wolf. The moon does it. Or, as in one film, evidently he's cursed because he was born on the same day that Christ was born. You may be able to tell us more about this. And that's not nice. He shouldn't have done that. And so he lapses into the kind of human being which I secretly believe most of us would like sometimes to become. That is straight animal, instinct, violent, enthusiastic for glandular behavior.
Do you have a beard 365 days a year, or does this only happen during the changes of the moon?
Mine is permanent.
All right.
Mine is permanent. I have other changes. But he does seem to represent that duality in us, the split in us. We get this with Dracula, too, who, again, in our demonology, is wearing a cutaway suit and yet has instinctual behavior, a very powerful...
I would feel Dracula is the only character of the five you're mentioning that really doesn't engender any sympathy, does it?
No, I never had sympathy.
You've got sympathy
for
for the monster in Frankenstein, because he's created by someone else. It's not his fault. And you certainly have great sympathy, I think, for the werewolf, because...
It wasn't his fault. He couldn't help it.
And the one I've just made, there's great sympathy, because the boy is conscious that he's turning into one. He doesn't like it at all. There's great sympathy, and yet when he is the werewolf, it's quite terrifying. And of course, I suppose you can't blame
King Kong?
Oh, he's a lovable old thing, doing that with Fay Ray.
Yes, and the way things...
What he was doing, though, we better watch that. It's X-rated. What he It's X-rated.
The way things are going...
X-rays, Fay Ray.
The way it's going in New York, I think that Mayor Beam has offered King Kong the Empire State Building for a price, if you'd like to have it. Possibly we can generate some revenue that way. There's a lot of religion in these monster pictures.
I've been arguing that in some sense, unfortunately, a great many young people get the only religion they know in our movie theaters watching horror films, where there's always a sense of procession and ritual.
But in the Dracula, I'm sorry to keep talking, but in the Dracula pictures, I think it's very much the side of good versus evil, isn't it?
The cross held up.
Oh, very much. It's there, you see.
I warn you.
Yes, very much. And obviously the original story by Stoker.
Of course, even King Kong died for our sins, you know. And I was most astonished when I arrived in Paris recently and discovered that the raging philosophical debate of the moment was King Kong a lesbian?
Oh dear, well, does it matter? But I think there's this lovely lady who was coming on with this called Miss Barbara Lee, and she's going to make a picture called Vampirella, which brings in the feminine side of vampires. It's a wonderful script.
Well, The Daughter of Dracula was a rather fine presentation of the
was there a film called Daughter of Dracula?
Yes, Dracula's Daughter.
Recently.
It was called Dracula's Daughter.
This brings up a point. You say that was a fine film. How do you separate the wheat from the chaff, the good efforts from the garbage? Now,
anything made by Hammer is the best.
Yes, anything with Peter Cushing.
They are among the scariest. Were you talking about the one, the brain picture here a couple of seconds ago, or was that...
You were.
The brain picture?
What were we
about
talking
the chap who was born 30
he was
years.
born, he slept for 30 years. He was born asleep.
And that was a fact, was it then?
Well, I think, I'm just telling you the name of the film. It's called The Brain of Jonathan.
All right, now I remember seeing another one that was really a garbage film called Donovan's Brain. And there are all kinds of brain films, all kinds of Dracula, The Legend of, The Daughter of, The Son of, Frankenstein, Wolfman, King Kong. How do you separate good stuff from bad stuff, leaving aside the studio for which you make pictures, sir, which I'm certain does good work, because I remember The Horror of Frankenstein, which I think was a Hammer production.
Indeed, yes.
Yep.
I'd be interested to hear Forey's response, because
there are some that are really camp and that you laugh at, and it's hokey time.
Absolutely. There's been a statement made in the fantasy world that 90% of everything is crud, whether it's politicians or motion pictures or TV or what it may be. And we're very fortunate nowadays if several times a year we get something of the quality of Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist. I've been in, next year will be the 50th year that I've been involved in the field of fantasy and monster motion pictures and so on. To me, there were 13 golden years, half in the silent era and half in the talking. If someone said to me, now you're going to have the opportunity to save just 13 years out of everything in the last 75, I would start with 1923 with Lon Chaney as Quasimodo, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and go into the golden era when Karloff and Lugosi and Claude Rains were in their prime. That went from 23 to 36 and really had the heart of horror and monsters and science fiction and fantasy during that period. And I think primarily it was because there were great directors like James Whale and Todd Browning, and great personalities like Karloff, Lugosi, Rains, Peter Lorre, and so on. It just all came together in one magic 13-year period.
I have a more extensive belief in the possibility of excellence. I wouldn't limit it to 15 years, but I think it's because I approach the films from a quite different point of view. I regard them all as archaeological exhibits of the condition of the mind of the West from the 20s to the 70s. They're bits and pieces telling us something about our fixation with this form of violent imagery. And in that way, you get brilliant moments. You don't really need, for instance, Dracula with Bela Lugosi is not a good film as an art statement of the Dracula, of the vampire theme, but it has moments of such authority, such enormous projection of the idea of the vampire, as for a few moments Lugosi understood him, that we have a classic, though we don't have a classic film. And you get moments like this in many, many places. Though you say that Dracula hasn't got our sympathy, from time to time it seems to me that Christopher Lee has a look on his face as he looks down at a woman of such sadness, an overwhelming sadness.
Yes, Christopher's marvelous at getting that sort of sympathy. But I think over the Bela Lugosi film, don't forget that was made, great improvements have been made in the actual film techniques and cameras and everything, that naturally I think you can't compare the two of making it.
Well, except, see, I would argue that Nosferatu, which comes even earlier, is still a total artwork
and
of a superior
the Caligari's Secret,
the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, yes.
That was a very
So it isn't just technology.
No, but not quite, but sometimes a little in the playing. You see, many of those actors were from the stage, and although all acting is like all beer, but there are many, many different beers, and you can't act the same on film as you do on the stage or television. And I think before he became frightfully good, but I think he was originally a stage actor, and films are in their early days, and they were still using a stage technique on film, and very much so in British pictures. I mean, they were very bad because of that, because they hadn't learned how to do it. I think that also makes some parts of it seem forced to modern eyes. Do you perhaps agree?
Oh, I do.
No, that's not denigrating the picture in any way, but I think there are reasons.
The only reservations I have are that we do get the film Vampire, the German film, which had all those disabilities, nevertheless made a work of art.
That was the early one, was it?
Yes, it's silent.
Oh, really?
Yes, indeed. It's a silent film. So that it isn't just that. Technique is not the only explanation, it seems to me.
No.
On the other hand, you get in even sometimes strangely poor films, you get moments of great power. Someone has there's a Philippine vampire film, the title of which I cannot begin to tell you, because it's so run-of-the-mill, it's gone right by me.
Possibly it's an abominable title.
It probably is.
Yes.
But the cameraman took occasion to do marvelous things with texture. And so you get a film whose story you forget immediately, but I'll never forget the way the camera moved down alleys and picked up the texture of concrete, or the texture of a cloak, or the palm of a hand. And you're always getting surprises like this in film.
And I think also, in answer to your sort of original question, I think what does tend to happen, someone, say, makes a marvelous so-called horror picture, and it is very successful, and many other people try to jump quickly on that bandwagon and fail because they go at it too fast, really, to jump on while the iron is hot. And I think that's what tends to, you get a whole lot of sort of also-ran pictures.
Anything successful immediately is duplicated. Television shows, cars, movies, you name it.
Absolutely. So
what was the one where the body of a woman who was involved in a car accident had a head from another body put onto it? Do you remember that one?
Well, if you may be thinking, are we both thinking of this Christopher Isherwood Frankenstein film? It's called Frankenstein, The True Story, in which there is a transposed head.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
And in the end, he destroys what...
Yes, he pulls her head off.
was that made as a film?
It was made as a television
I wasn't in it, was I?
No,
That's it. Yeah, right, exactly. A television film. Yeah. Exactly right. And those things stick in your mind.
Yeah. In your brain. Yeah.
Yes. Well, sometimes people who have minds don't have brains.
His hasn't been asleep for 30 years.
When you're going to bed at night, do you ever think about these things and get scared?
No.
Oh, then you're missing half the fun of what you do, believe me.
No, I'm thinking how to scare you.
Think about...
If I scared myself, I'd be a dead
Dr. Frankenstein coming into your room tonight and pulling your head off.
Oh, but he's only doing it for a frightfully good cause. The good of mankind.
You will show us the Dracula ring, the cape, and we have some other artifacts here, and we'll get on with that after these announcements. And we'll be right back after these announcements.
My lunch.
Dracula, and I just want to... we have a close-up over here on number 3. You can see there. There you go.
Well, I was very fortunate to befriend him in the last 3 years of his life, and there's something I wanted to touch on when we were discussing the 1931, the classic version of his Dracula. He frequently talked to me in the penultimate days of his career in 1955 that his great unrealized dream was to do Dracula once again with the new techniques now that we had widescreen and multi-track sound, and particularly he was thinking of 3D, that he could actually have the bats flying right out of the screen. It could be a blood red color and so on, but he was never to realize that dream. He wore, in addition to this cape, which I have, he actually took one to the grave with him. I was at his funeral, happened to be the 99th person to pass by, and his widow has the 3rd cape. There was only the 1 ring, so I was very fortunate to inherit that.
What else do we have that we can look at here tonight?
Well, we have a series of devices to keep the vampire away, the most familiar of which, of course, is the garlic. And, or perhaps even more. What have you got?
My lunch.
That was worn by a very famous television personality.
Is this
that's the James Arness Sing from Another World. That's old Gunsmoke.
This is it.
That's it.
Boy, to see it...
No, it's that, Son of What, is what it really is.
Have you seen that thing where you're going along in the car and they see there's and the hand comes out, I'm turning left, and that comes out?
No.
Oh, yes.
Is this in truth the one?
The one.
It shoots you.
It's disappointing in reality, but when you saw it come around that door in that picture, it was terrifying. Here it looks like exactly what it is.
Well, here it looks like scratch my back and I'll scratch yours.
You could do 2 at the same time with this.
Yes.
Yeah, this is H.G. Wells' idea, the end product of man after breathing smog, I suppose, for about 500,000 years, what he called a Morlock in the time machine when...
Oh, in the underground.
When George Pal took us...
That's marvelously flexible, isn't it?
500,000 years into the future, yes. And I think the wig does a little something for it, too.
Makes it hairy.
Yes, that makes it look like me when I'm shaving with the wig on.
And then this adorable little creature was running around chasing...
yes.
The black girl, I don't mean she was physically black. What's her name? Catherine, or...
Was this supposed to be...
That's television
in the Trilogy of Terror, she played quite a few roles.
And is that a shrunken head?
No, that was probably carved out of coconut.
Yeah. Oh, I did. But was it to represent a shrunken head? Or,
yes.
Yes.
Well, it had a body that went with it, and really went wild chasing this heroin around the kitchen.
What do you have in the little...
Well, the other remedies against the vampire are, of course, the cross. But...
show the stake that went through the heart.
Yes. In the novel, most Americans think that Dracula is killed with the thrust of a stake through his heart, and that, of course, is what the films have been showing for many years. But in reality, this stake, and this is a model of the stake as described by Dr. Van Helsing, who's sitting there, in Stoker's novel, the novel Dracula, the stake is 3 feet long, 3 inches at the base, sharpened to a point and burned in the fire. And this is driven through the heart of a 19-year-old girl, Lucy Westenra. To kill Dracula himself required the help of these 2 knives. This is the kukri knife. There's a picture in my book showing the...
almost like the Gurkhas.
This is a Gurkha knife, precisely. It's a beheading knife of the Gurkhas, who are required to draw blood if they draw it out of their scabbards. So in case they have not beheaded anyone that day, they do a little personal cutting. Yes. And this is what Jonathan Harker uses to cut Dracula's head off. And since that death is an act of international cooperation, this is the Bowie knife. with which Dracula is stabbed to the heart. And then he gets that look of...
When did Bowie invent his knife?
About 1843.
Oh, so we're all right with dates.
It's an old, yes, and Bowie died in the Battle of the Alamo.
Yes, yes. We
Killed
that,
by knives, as I have an extended
What was the
note.
one where you sprinkle poppy seeds in the coffin of the vampire?
There's no film that has shown that. But here they are. Here are the poppy seeds.
New one on me.
It's not new. It just has not yet been taken.
It's not nearly as dramatic as a stake through the heart or a beheading.
But that could be used.
And I'm a touch pedantic. What you do with the poppy seeds is you pour them into the coffin, and when the vampire wakes in the evening, he sees the poppy seeds, and being a curious creature, he starts to count them. Well, it takes him all night to count them, and then it's day, and he keeps them together. That's one thing.
No vampires that dumb. They don't count the
they are
poppy
that
seeds.
dumb. They are cursed creatures. The other device is this. Again, you've not seen this, though I see that Mr. Cushing looks somewhat odd. These are knots, and you put knotted string into the coffin so that when the vampire wakes, again, the curious creature, he tries to take the knots apart and spends a delightful evening working on the knots.
Is this in Bram Stoker?
No, it's in my book, The Annotated Dracula, where you can find out all about it. Let's see what else have we got.
If I might, that stake, if you'll just demonstrate it.
No, we won't have a demonstration.
No.
We will look at it, but we will
Where are you,
not.
Chris? Having played so many of the period doctors and things, when I always go to my doctor to ask, how do you take a brain now to do anything? Because I think that you must do it all correctly.
Yes.
And when I said, now, I had to use a hypodermic in the picture. He said, what's the date? And I said, about 1800 or 1750. He said, well, the thing was as big as this. He said, it was like more people were killed by being given the early hypodermic needle because they were the ones they used on cattle, you see. And in film, imagine me with a hypodermic like this, you could get the biggest laugh in the business. So that's why we have to cheat it. And in a way, because we never make our films with tongue-in-cheek. We enjoy doing them, but it's very serious. And people always laugh. As long as they enjoy themselves, we never mind.
But when you're making the picture, you're not giving yourself nudges in the side and saying, hey, this will really get it.
We'd rather they didn't laugh where we wouldn't like them. But if you started to state, because there's a certain tension in those pictures, and that's why people like on a roller coaster are going screaming down, because they know they're going to be laughing coming up the side. If you use this at that moment, I think it might get a laugh of something as big as this.
On the other,
because you've got that small stake, and it's only about that, they're going to give it a good clunk. It's a horrid thing.
And then when you took the stake out of the vampire, he came back to life, didn't he?
well, that happens in the movies.
Well, of course.
We've seen him remove it. Thank you. Thank you, sir. He does that with as if it were champagne.
And he also knows how to hold it to impale one with.
Yes, he does. He's the master impaler.
I don't think he does that as champagne. He does it as real pain.
Could tend to get a few laughs.
Let me
in the
bust
wrong
away for a
places.
couple of seconds, folks, and we'll continue after these announcements.
Which is keen.
About that for a while. The sexual overtones and implications of driving a stake through a heart and others. Well, there's something phallic about driving a stake through a heart.
Well, if you like to look at it that way, but you see, I think it's the most odd thing.
In fact, an X-rated horror picture would be something, wouldn't it?
An
X-rated horror picture.
They're all X-rated, aren't they?
Not yet.
Not
They should be. Some of them should be.
But I used to love to see, who was the swimming star?
Johnny Williams?
Yes, I used to draw her pictures. They were shown recently again on television. I mean, I saw them originally, where she's swimming with all these lovely water jets. Well, one or two of these extraordinary critics for television, why have critics on television, I don't know. They said, this extraordinary symbol of sex when Powell was swimming in the water in these water jets. I used to enjoy them for the beauty. Why bring this? I think sex is talked about far too much. If you like the thing, it's very fine. If you enjoy it, do. But no, the reason for staking Dracula is to get rid of him. It's not to give anyone a kick.
Mr. Cushing, you know, I honor you for being one of the great interpreters of Dr. Van Helsing. But Dr. Van Helsing in Stoker's novel is teaching a little squad of young men how to deal with pale, red-lipped, bosomy women who put their arms out and say, "Come to me, Arthur." Do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
And what is he teaching them to do? Each of the people in that novel carries a little pointy instrument. Dr. Seward has a scalpel. The Texan carries the Bowie knife. Jonathan Harker carries the kukri knife. And the priest of them all, the man who's teaching them how to deal with women, carries the big stick. Now, it's
But
very
my dear
difficult.
boy, I carry a fountain pen.
Well, don't flaunt it.
Oh, that's the sign.
You have the little stick, the priest has the big stick.
There's more to it.
You
However,
know what TR said, walk softly and carry a big stick. This
Now,
is what
the
got
whole
us
point,
to
of course, is that in the novel, in Stoker's novel, Stoker himself, as one knows from his biography, was frightened of his own relationship with men, and equally frightened. Oh, I didn't say that.
No, I did.
I'm not about to say that. I'm willing to say he was frightened by his relationship with men, particularly with Sir Henry Irving. And
Well,
the way...
wasn't.
No, you just want to do gossip, don't you? I'm trying to do scholarship.
I'm just here to chat.
I want to do scholarship. The whole point is that it's inescapable in the novel, and I think it's reflected in all of the films from Nosferatu to the present, that what the men are learning is how to quiet sexually turned on women. And the technique for doing it, because Stoker was a Victorian for whom such techniques were frightening, involves doing something horrible to them. There's a terrible Victorian overlay in the novel, of course, and that persists down to our own day. There's no question that we don't...
Could this be translated into he who carries a big stick can quiet a sexually active woman?
Precisely.
No,
With the difference that Stoker
little
would
truths
be...
come out as well.
Don't you also think, apart from the big stick idea, I think, particularly as my dear friend Christopher Lee plays the character of Dracula, the women are very much attracted to him. I mean, that first picture, you had the lady opening her French windows, didn't you, lying back and waiting for her lover to come. Oh, that side of it. But I don't
It's called
think
sex in America.
Sorry?
It's called sex in America.
How do you spell that? But no, you're talking about Van Helsing riding a stake in is sexual. If you like to look at it the way it is, but I don't think that's ever meant.
You said there might be X-rated horror films. Actually, there have been. There have been the Andy Warhol version of Frankenstein and Dracula. There was the Planet of the Rapes. There was the...
There's one called...
Was there?
And there was the first homosexual Frankenstein called Dr. Frankenstein. I guess they could publish it in the paper if they could say it on TV.
I had to just get the word right in there. Say,
Do that again.
Sure. Oh, haven't you ever seen me put my foot in my eye? I want to see the other one. I think you do
Very good manicure.
There was a picture out called Spermula, was there not?
Well, there was Beaverella.
I think we're pushing it.
Yeah, I guess we're pushing.
Yes, let's just get back to...
Yes, let's get back to other forms of sexuality.
Let's get on to the commercial, and then I have to ask the key question of the night. I'll think of it during the break. We'll be right back.
Years and that have been sneered at by other people.
Do you think you're trying to make what is intended to be a fun subject too serious sometimes?
I don't think that that's what I'm trying to do. That I've been charged with this from time to time. I like to say that I'm something of an archaeologist of the artifacts of the imagination. I'm interested in what we look at and what we care about. And that's my job. My job is to be serious. It doesn't matter that other people don't feel like being serious. And I do find patterns and important meanings. I think there's no question, as we've been saying to each other, that these horror films have religious content, they have some sexual content, and most of all, they have a simple moral content. They say to young people, good will win and evil will lose. Now, some of us tend to think that that's already too late for such simplicity, but young people are in some sense reassured by watching these films.
How much belief do you all have in the real occult? Witchcraft and extrasensory perception and talking with dead people or reincarnation?
Well, you've got quite a mixed bag there.
I just gave a few broadly scattered examples.
Telepathy, I could have some belief in. The rest of them, no. I'm no no belief whatsoever.
You're not trying to find some kind of a higher belief or higher state of satisfaction in
I'm just sort of, I would say, for the last 18 years, been bringing Halloween to the country about 12 times a year instead of once.
I don't have much belief in the ones you've mentioned. I also don't want to have skepticism. I'm quite prepared to discover that things I don't understand exist, and once they're demonstrable and experienced, I'm willing to believe the next crucial, important truth. But for the moment, I'm simply a standard humanist who believes that we have to look closely at our nightmares as a way of understanding our daytime life.
That's very well said. Very well
I hope
said.
so.
And how about yourself, sir? Witches.
Well, I believe completely, going off on very different tactics. I'm sure you don't want to talk about
Not at all.
But I believe completely in the life to come. Because there would be no sense in our 70 if there wasn't something to follow. Just for one instance, why should we just for an example, 4 out of millions in this, thousands of millions in this world, be in pretty good health and everything at our disposal, material things, which are not really important, but we've got those as well. People are suffering. People are born with suffering. They lose their sight, or these terrible tragedies that happen all over. What would be the point of living when some of us had it all, some of us have a little, some of us have nothing? That must at some time or other be leveled out. We must all have what we need, and many of us don't. It must come sometime. It's not going to come in this life to many of them. And if we believe in God, we all swear on the Bible. Well, if you're swearing on a person, God, whom we should all believe in, if you don't believe in the man, then what are you swearing on? You might as well swear on that
ashtray.
Yeah, anything. There is a life.
But to you, the next life is a spiritual one.
Yes,
as opposed to
I
yourself
know
coming
more
back
about it than you do, but I believe there is something to come in some form. And whether one can get in touch or not, which brings in some of the things you mentioned, I believe in ESP. I mean, there are certain people who do have this extraordinary sensitivity. My beloved wife was one, and she knew when anything was going wrong with me if I was, several miles away. But I do believe in that quite firmly. I don't think witches and things, but again, like you, why do we not believe in something that we don't know, like the science?
I think a too strong skepticism is as absurd as too strong
a belief, of course, to be skeptical of everything and to believe in nothing, right?
A willing suspension of disbelief, but suspension, not closing it off forever.
And I also think, I agree with everything you've all said, but I think the most important thing about these films is that it doesn't matter what you do so long as you entertain the people who see them. That, I think, is the answer to their success. Because when you think Hammer's made their first remake after the 29 pictures in 1956 or 58, I think it was. And it was the Frankenstein picture, and it was only one amongst 5. There was Up the Junction, I think it was Peter Sellers, and Frankenstein picture, and 2 or 3 others, Quatermass picture. No idea of the starting this incredible snowball, which is still rolling to this day, 25 years later.
As you say, the reason these films are made is to entertain, and that is the reason we've done this program tonight, and I hope that everybody has been entertained by the artifacts, by the stories, by the by remembering monsters.
Well done.
and remember, as the gentleman said, the way to understand our day part lives is to understand better our nightmares. Think about that before you turn off the lights tonight, and we'll be right back and tell you about next week's programs after this announcement.